Hey, my name is Steve, composer, engineer, and lecturer. Welcome back to the channel and your first steps into the KONTAKT sampler. In chapter 3 so far, we've checked out quite a bit of the scripting journey for creating your basic interface for your first instrument. We've added in a performance view and our own custom background, and we've already added in some sliders, some knobs, and some buttons. They've been tied to various functions, and we've now got a fairly good grip of what callbacks, commands, and functions can do in our script. Now there is one set of parameters that is a little bit more challenging than your average volume or cutoff or whatever. And this is when you're affecting a modulator. They are a little bit harder for KONTAKT to find, so there's a few extra steps which we're going to check out in this video. Let's dive in. Okay, so again, let's remind ourselves of where we're up to so far. This is the Folon sound, a beautiful kind of bell-like texture or synthy 80s kind of vibe. Is a bit of an interesting mix. And they, of course, were the samples that we created in chapter 1 and then built into an instrument in chapter 2. Now in chapter 3, we've gone through and added our background, and we've added in some sliders, some knobs, and some buttons here as well. Plenty of things to be going on with, but now we're going to add in some more knobs and attach them to our envelope. Our envelope should be up here, and that's things like attack, decay, sustain, and release. These are very important controls. If we want to change the envelope of the note, we can really dramatically change the way that it sounds. Right now, there is quite a harsh bite to the samples. You can hear that bell quite significantly. But what if we could turn that down? What if we could have a slow ramp up into the sound, make that a little more subtle? That's what we're going to try and do with the next knob. Now, of course, what I'm talking about is inside each one of these groups, we have a mod, which is the envelope, the ADSR envelope. That's the standard ADSR envelope with also hold in there as well. We saw in chapter 2 that what we could do is click on this button and it will show us the modulation down here. And we've got our attack control that we're going to try and target with this knob. Now, because these don't live in a group, but they don't live at an instrument level, they live on their own sort of modulator level, they're a little bit harder to find. So we have to use a find mod command inside our set engine path. First of all though, let's revisit declaring a variable because we're going to need to create a knob for this and then dive into the function behind it. So in our onInit block, we're going to come down here, enter a couple of times for clarity's sake, and we're going to declare a UI underscore knob here underneath. This is going to be called attack, or ATT for short. I like to keep it nice and brief because it just makes it easier when I'm typing it out loads of times. And we're going to send it in the parameters. If you're unsure about the parameters that should be going in here, double check in the description below. There is the full KONTAKT tutorial playlist, and in chapter 3, one of the episodes, we dive into knobs and all the parameters that are involved in this next step. So we're going to add our minimum value, our maximum value there, and our ratio value of 1. Underneath, we're going to move that, and we're going to move that to a particular place on the UI. So we're going to be moving the attack control, the ATT control, and we're going to be moving it along the x-axis by 670, and on the y-axis by about 70. That's what I worked out before. We're going to then make that persistent, and we're going to set the text to. All right, let's hit apply and dive into our interface and see what's happened. Here it is. We can see a knob has been added in there and it's been labeled attack and it's ready to go. Now let's take a look at adding in the function, and this is where it gets a little bit hairy for modifiers or modulators. To start with, we're going to be doing something very similar to what we've been doing with the set engine par already. So let's dive in and create a new onUI control. And of course, this time we're going to be setting it to our attack. At the bottom there, we're going to put our end on and we're going to type everything in here. So we're going to be using the same set engine par, and the name of the attack controller is quite simple and, you know, pretty much in line with what we could expect. We could probably guess it by now, but engine par attack is what it is. And of course, the value that we want it to be updated with is whatever we set the attack knob to. So we're going to pop that in there. Now, across chapter 2, there was an episode dedicated to modifiers or modulators. That episode, we spoke about how a modulator, like an envelope, can only be applied to one group, not all groups at once. So every group in my library has a separate modulator, and that modulator is an envelope that's controlling the volume. So if we check out the different ones, we've got pads here, we've got a modifier, And plucks, we've got a modulator in here as well. In bells, you can see that there isn't one at the moment, so I'm going to add one. I'm going to jump into envelopes and add an ADSR. And that's added it there, and I can click this button and see the modifier down there. Now that's our first group, so that's group 0. So in this script, I'm going to type in 0 because that's the group that we're dealing with first of all. Then here is where it gets interesting, because a modulator isn't on an effects slot. We've actually got to go find it with another function or another command. Before we can find it, we've got to make sure we know what it's called, and that's going to be the important next step. So on here, if we select this, we can actually right-click and name it. Now it's set it as a particular name, and that name is far too long for my liking. So I'm going to name it something different. Type in name, and I'm going to keep it fairly consistent. This is the first group, so group 0. So I'm just going to go env space 0. And that's going to be the shorthand name. And the second group I would do env1, the third group I do env2, basically keeping group 0 with 0, group 1 with 1, group 2 with 2, and so on. So it's a nice consistent format. So I would go through on plucks and I would do the same. I would go through and name it and rename that one env1 because this is group 2, which counting from 0 based is 1. So then up here, we're going to use a find_mod function or command. Find_mod. So in the brackets, we're going to say which group to look in and what is it called. So it's in group 0 because it's in the first group, and it is called a text-based name, which is a string. So quotation marks here is env0 close quotations. Basically that function inside there is going to go find the modifier, and that way we can find the attack knob that's on that modifier. And then the final thing, it isn't at an instrument level effect or a send level effect, so we're just going to use -1 at the end there as well. Okay, once I've done, I hit apply, and this should now delay the attack. So you can hear as I roll it back, we are losing the bite of those bells, but it is only doing just the bells. It's not doing anything else. Everything else is staying the same because I've only attached it to one group's modifier at the moment. What I can do here is copy the same line of code and just update it to the other couple of groups too. So I would come in here and I would copy this, and I'm just going to enter down, paste, and then I'm going to update some details in here. It's going to be in the second group, so group 1, and the third group, group 2. And now this is the benefit of labeling them in the same way, is that I've kept a consistent naming style, which makes it easy to update these as well. So I'd hit apply and then test it out. So now we're delaying the attack so we can get this swelling crescendo, which basically disappears the bells because they're such a short, quick attack. But the pads and the plucks are also getting blended in softly there as well. Now we can update the value in here as well to reflect the value of the attack, which is in seconds or milliseconds, just in the same way that we did it here. If you're not sure how to do that, just double back to one of the videos in this chapter where we covered knobs and how to do that. We set the knob label to a particular value that is drawn from that control. But now we could do the rest of the envelope if we wanted. We could do the sustain, the release, the decay if we wanted, even the hold. We can do it all in the same way by using that find_mod command to find the modifier in that group. One little extra thing to be aware of, and I think this is a little bit of a glitch, at least from what I can tell. Sometimes after you've written your code, you could sometimes come back into the bells or into whatever group and find that this is missing and just been deleted. For some reason, it's just gone. I don't know why, but it just seems to be a bit of a glitch. Don't panic, just add another one back. Just like we did before, we can just add the envelope in and rename it, and it'll be back to working like normal. I don't know why, it's something I've noticed, and it happens a lot on the very first group for some reason. I don't know if it's some kind of weird sort of glitchy thing that's happening. I don't know, Kontact, if you're listening Native Instruments, please investigate, check out. But otherwise, just don't panic if that happens, just add it back in, make sure you rename it the correct thing, and it'll all be back and fine, working just as you had it before. Now, the other thing to mention as well is I've added in 3 lines of code, and if you've got 20 groups or 50 groups, this can fill up really quickly. There is a solution for that to limit the amount of code that you're typing in by using a loop. Now that's a little advanced right now, and I don't want you to have to think about that and try and add that all in and work it all out. But if you are interested, check the links above and in the description for the video that I've done already on that process. It's something that took me a long time to find by diving into forums and that sort of stuff. It's quite a common thing in codes to do loops, to kind of save coding lines and automate some of the process. So do check it out if you're interested, but at the moment, if you're just starting off into scripting, that might be just a little bit too advanced. Try this method first, and as your library grows with more groups, then you can explore that further. Okay, so that's a number of effects and switches and all sorts of things that we're now controlling with on UI controls that we've created, added to our interface, positioned where we want, and tied the functionality to. You should feel really proud of yourself so far. You've created the basics of the instrument, and it would be fine to leave it at that point. However, if you're interested in adding in some physical hardware controllers and getting those to do something to your instrument's UI, check out the next video. Subscribe and ding that bell so you're notified when that one lands. Otherwise, until then, I'll catch you in the next one.